Welcome to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. I'm the sports editor of the Herald Democrat, Jason De La Rosa, and you're listening to the latest edition of the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. We have reached the first round of the playoffs. That means the regular season has unfortunately come to an end for several of our teams here in Texoma, but we do have more than a handful of teams that did advance, and we will recap the end of the season for those teams. We will look ahead to those teams that will be playing hopefully beyond this week. I'm sure there are a couple of teams that have eyes on some deep playoff runs, but there are some good matchups in the first round of the playoffs. So we're going to jump right into it because we have a lot to discuss, as we always do here on the podcast. Because we're recapping the last game of the season, I'm just going to go down through the districts like we normally do because that makes sense because we have some teams that did not qualify for the playoffs, and we want to touch on what they did last week and their seasons as a whole and what it may mean for them going forward. So we're going to jump right in as we always do, top to bottom, and we will start with District 7-5A Division 1, and that is the Sherman Bearcats, who ended their season on a positive note. They pulled off a comeback victory against West Mesquite, 26-22, to finish the season 4-6 overall and 2-4 in district play. That was good for fifth place. They were 2 games out of a playoff spot. We talked last week. They had to beat Tyler to have this game at home to end the season against West Mesquite mean something. And then they would have needed Longview to beat Tyler, which is what happened. Longview ended up beating Tyler 49-0. So if Sherman would have been able to win that game against Tyler, or to go back a couple of weeks, even against McKinney North, there would have been the potential for a three-way tie in the standings for fourth place, and Sherman could have advanced on a tiebreaker. Unfortunately, they were not able to get either of those wins, so they finished fifth. And we had the three-way tie of Longview, Tyler, and McKinney North at 4-2 in the district standings behind an undefeated Highland Park team. And this was a game, for both Sherman and West Mesquite. We didn't know how it was going to go because you have two teams that had nothing beyond the game on Friday, and it was a really close game. Back and forth, action-packed. One team dominated one quarter. Then the next quarter, the other team was able to get in gear. So it was a really fun game for something that didn't have a lot on the line. Some big plays on both sides of the ball for both teams. Sherman jumped out to a 14-0 lead after the first quarter. West Mesquite led 15-14 at halftime. They were up 22-14 going to the fourth quarter, and that's where Sherman was able to make some of those big plays on both sides of the ball to pull out the 26-22 victory. Leading the way was Phoenix Grant, who was 18 of 26 passing for 274 yards and a touchdown. He also ran 23 times for 93 yards and 2 touchdowns. The game-deciding score was by Kane Bowen. He had a 5-yard run with a little over 5 minutes remaining, and that was the difference. Sherman was able to come up with a fourth down stop just outside the red zone on a fourth and short play. West Mesquite tried to run right up the middle. Tito Chavez and Chaz Brown just kind of broke through the line in tandem, and there was nowhere for the running back to go. Lost yardage, and Sherman was able to pick up a first down, preserve that win. And so Sherman's season comes to an end. First year under a new head coach in Corey Kane. Obviously disappointing from the standpoint that Sherman made the playoffs last year, was the third seed, was not able to get back to the playoffs again this year. And it was a very roller coaster season for Sherman. They had some really good high moments. They had the comeback win against not just West Mesquite, but against Mount Pleasant on that last second Hail Mary, bouncing back in a good way after losing the Battle of the Axe to open the season. They had a blowout victory against Saginaw. They beat up Wiley East pretty good to start district play, and then they dropped the 4 after that. Gave up 50 points. 3 of their losses, they gave up 50 points. Obviously losing to Denison in the season opener, to have that happen again, to keep that streak going, in the negative way for them and the positive way for Denison. Just up and down. They weren't really able to get anything positive in sort of a streak going. And then if they would have lost this game, there was the potential that they would lose all their home games. But there were some bright spots. We talked about this game. Grant had a big game, passing and rushing, which is kind of he's done that all year. And then you look at some of the receivers. Vontrell Sanders, 5 catches for 101 yards and a touchdown. Aries Jones, 5 catches for 76 yards, or 78 yards and a touchdown. Zachorian Harris had 4 catches for 47. J.D. Parker had 2 for 34. And I think the biggest thing that you can say about the future is a lot of these guys are back. That was the one thing, talking with Coach Kane to get ready for this game. Yes, it didn't mean anything in terms of playoffs or seeding or anything like that. But he's one of those guys that wanted to see how they were going to respond to that situation. The fact that it was a close game, they had to make plays at certain points to pull this game out. And he said, and he was very quick to point out, we have 8 guys coming back on offense. We have 4 guys coming back on defense. The question for us, as they started, he said that the next season started Monday, and they need to find some people to fill some holes. They obviously have some spots at the skill position that they feel pretty good about. I think the defense was a work in progress throughout. Just even from when I saw them at different points in the season, from game 1 to game 3, there were different people in different spots, and just trying to find the right fits. And I think they obviously have more time, considering when the coaching change was made, to work on that and find some of the people that they can use. There were a lot of young guys on this team. There were a handful of freshmen, handful of sophomores that were getting varsity time. There were Vontrell Sanders is a guy who had a really good season at receiver. Again, sort of a roller coaster, have a big game, maybe get some attention from some people and take a step back 1 or 2. But that's a guy who was a basketball player, coming out for football for the first time, and has a game like he does to close out the season. Had almost 500 yards receiving, had 5 touchdowns. There's a lot of young guys. Almost all these receivers are coming back. Elijah Chapman's the main one that won't be back. He's one of those few guys on offense that are graduating. And if they can figure out a consistent running attack that doesn't have to rely on Grant doing a lot of stuff with keepers and scrambles and stuff like that, I think it could be interesting. Obviously, the biggest thing with Sherman is going to be in realignment, and we'll probably say this for everybody, because we have some people that are on the bubble for either going up or whether it's a classification or a division. Sherman turned in 2,185 kids. That's a number compared to last year that should be below the number. There is somebody that had mentioned that they should be safe. There's a belief that the 6A number actually comes down from what it was last time. And I believe that was 2230. So they should be safe to stay in 5A Division 1 at least for 2 more years. Sherman added almost 240 kids combined. So about 120 kids in the last two incoming freshman classes we're adding about 120 kids over the group that left those senior classes. So there's a really good chance that after this realignment, Sherman will be going 6A. And we're at a point with a lot of the teams in this district. This district could look very different next year. Wiley East is probably moving to 6A. There's a really good chance that Highland Park moves to 6A. And so it's hard to project when you don't know what the schedule is going to look like. What you don't know for sure what you're going to have. Obviously with Sherman, we know they're going to open with the Battle of the Axe, but after that, how many non-district games are they going to have? Are they going to be in a big district? Are they going to be in a smaller district? So there's a lot of question marks from that aspect for Sherman. But it's better than what we had coming into this year, where so many of the guys were lost on both sides of the ball that it was going to be interesting to see, who was going to take over at some certain spots. And I think throughout the season, the Bearcats got some answers for some of those positions, and I think for others, they kind of spent the whole season wondering, was that a good fit? Does that work? Did that work out well? That sort of thing. So, going to be interesting to see what realignment does. Like I said, I think they're going to stay in 5A at least for 2 more years, and then the only question will be, what is their district going to look like? Maybe take out some of those long trips to East Texas, maybe come back a little bit more towards the Metroplex, but we'll see for sure when the cutoff numbers come out. Probably about another month after Thanksgiving is when they usually come out, and then actual realignment the first week of February. So Sherman goes into the off season with a victory, 26-22 against West Mesquite. Next up in District 7 5A Division 2, we have the Denison Yellow Jackets, who are coming off a 43-0 victory against Princeton. That's a nice little tune-up for them as they get ready for their playoff game. They are headed to Ennis in a 5A Division 2 Region 2 by-district game, 7:30 on Friday night at Ennis, because as we know in the big school classifications, if you get the top 2 seeds in your district, you get to host a playoff game. And in this case, Denison will at 7-3 is going to play Ennis, who is 10-0 and is I believe ranked 4th this week. The rankings that came out, the final end of the season regular season rankings. From this point on, they don't use rankings once we get into the playoffs. But Ennis is up to number 3 this week. They were 4 last week. I had to double check because I knew that they were up there. And so the things do not get easy for Denison to start off with. They had the chance to get the 3rd seed and potentially play Royce City. They would have had to go to Royce City, but it would have been better than facing a district champ who's number 3 in the state. If there is anything we can say about Denison, they certainly will not be intimidated by the fact that they're playing an undefeated team who's ranked in the state, because this is going to be the 3rd time this season that the Yellow Jackets will play an undefeated team who's ranked in the top 10 in the state. Of course, their loss to Lovejoy, lost to Frisco, who was ranked when they played them, and now they're playing Ennis. And so it's a tough matchup for Denison right out of the chute. They did have a nice bounce back from that loss to Liberty, and I will point out that for those who did not pay attention, I'm sure there were some people who did. Liberty ended up going and beating Lovejoy 27-24 in that key game that ended up with Lovejoy, Liberty, and Frisco all tying for first place and sharing the district championship. So Denison at 7-3, their 3 losses were to a 9-1 Lovejoy team, a 9-1 Frisco team, and a 9-1 Liberty team, and all of those losses are to each other. So basically, those 3 opponents that beat Denison did not lose to anybody outside of the district or anybody below them in the district. They all beat each other. And so if you're keeping score on combined records of those 3, that is a 27-3 record amongst Denison's losses. And of course, now they're playing a 10-0 team here in the playoffs. So Denison has played tough people before, so they're not going to be intimidated. And they do go in with a little bit of momentum. So like we mentioned, they had the tough loss to Lovejoy that locked them into 4th place. And so it's going to be kind of interesting to see what they were going to do against Princeton. Princeton didn't have anything to play for. Denison really didn't have anything to play for other than it was senior night, and you just want to make sure that guys don't get hurt because you have a playoff game to prepare for next week. And they were pretty methodical and slash just kind of wanting to get a nice lead and then turn it over to the backups, which is basically what they did, because this was a 28-0 game at halftime. Denison scored their last points literally on the first snap of the fourth quarter. So basically it was 43-0 with still a full fourth quarter to play. And so that was more than enough in this game. Jadarian Price, last game at Munson Stadium, goes out with a pretty nice effort. 12 carries for 175 yards and 3 touchdowns. One of them was on a pass, a screen pass on fourth down for 29 yards. So he ended up actually having more than 200 yards from scrimmage in this game. Caleb Havner was 11 of 19 passing for 133 yards and 2 touchdowns. His other touchdown went to Dylan DeHorney. And then in the second half, Jack Alleman had a 22-yard touchdown run. He finished with 9 carries for 110 yards. And then Trayon Butler finished it off, got his first touchdown of the season on that first play of the fourth quarter to close out the scoring. Denison ran for almost 300 yards. They finished with over 400 yards. The defense, obviously, they got a shutout. So they're obviously playing really well. This is the second straight year that they've shut out Princeton, and they really wanted to make sure that they got that shutout. Princeton finished with 157 yards. Jalik Lewis had an interception. Lane Tharp had an interception. So they were able to force a couple turnovers as well. Princeton only ran for 4 yards. They had 28 carries for 4 yards. So it was there was one drive that Princeton had when they got close early, and then that's when Tharp had his interception. I think Princeton had first and goal at the 5, and they got backed up a little bit, and then they tried to throw, and it did not go well. So like I said, really good to go into the playoffs off this win. Braden Maxwell did get hurt, one of the safeties. So that obviously was the one thing they were trying to avoid. It's gonna be interesting to see if he's gonna be able to go. And you hate that for him because that's one of these 30 seniors or whatever they have on this roster. You don't want to miss your last game / a playoff game if you can avoid it. And like I said, with going to play Ennis, it's going to be hard for those who have followed Denison's recent history. They have been to the playoffs recently more than a couple of times, and they have lost in the first round. That included last year, losing to North Forney, again in a game where they had to go on the road, to North Forney, and they came up short, and that has sort of been the thing with Denison for the last couple of years, that when they have made the playoffs, they have not been able to get past the first round. And the games have been pretty close. Last year was 32-25. They lose. They missed the playoffs the previous 2 years prior to that on tiebreakers, and then they lost in 2017 39-35 against Saginaw Boswell, in a game that they had a chance to go and put the game away. There was a fumble that was, when we saw the replay, it was not a fumble. The runner was down, but Boswell took over and then went and scored because it was 35-32, and then Boswell ended up going to score and in the final seconds to win that game. So that's sort of been the bugaboo, is that they've had their chances. They've been to this is the fourth playoff appearance in the last 6 years, and they're still seeking their first playoff win since the 2009 team went all the way to the state semifinals. So what we're gonna see what happens. No matter what, obviously it's been a really good season, and I think the feeling is that to get a win in the playoffs, that's the big thing. I know people are disappointed that they weren't able to finish better in district play, but obviously this district was really good. I think people look at Denison as the 4 seed and they're like, wow. Denison is not a typical 4 seed. To be 7-3 and to also have losses against the people that they have. So it says something about the depth of this district. Rock Hill finished 5th, and I think they were much improved, and I think they impressed a lot of people too. So it's just one of those deals where it's a luck of the draw. This is your matchup with this district, and whoever got 4th place was going to have to deal with Ennis in the first round. So we'll see what happens when Denison goes down to Ennis for 7:30 on Friday for their bi-district game to open the playoffs. Next up in 4A, we have Van Alstyne is going to be taking on Iowa Park in a 4A Division II Region 1 bi-district matchup. This game is at 7 p.m. on Friday at Saginaw Chisholm Trail. Van Alstyne comes in at 7-3 after they lost last week 44-10 against Aubrey. Iowa Park is 5-4. They come in at 56 after they won 56-7 against Vernon. That loss by Van Alstyne, we talked about last week. That was to determine 2nd place and 3rd place. Aubrey jumped out to the big lead 17-0 after the first quarter. It was 27-0 at halftime. And Van Alstyne was playing catch up from there. Wasn't able to put a whole lot together. Gavin Montgomery did have 11 carries for 95 yards and a touchdown. Diego Hernandez kicked a field goal. All that came in the 3rd quarter as they were trying to come back. But they were too far back. They weren't able to stop Aubrey's running game, which was they ran 62 times for almost 400 yards to put that game away and get the 2nd seed. The big thing, of course, we mentioned with Van Alstyne was that they were not the 4 seed, which means they avoided Graham. Although Iowa Park is traditionally a really good program. You see they're 5-4 and they're a 2nd place team. So they did a lot of their winning in district, but that's because their non-district schedule out there. I mean, they play some really good people. So to have the record that they have is it's probably a bit misleading. So you may look at that and say, Van Alstyne 7-3 and Iowa Park is 5-4. So if you're just looking at the records, that should be I'll say an easy win, but you have an advantage. But when you throw out Iowa Park, they played Holiday, who was undefeated in 3A Division II, Canadian. Gunner people know how good Canadian is. They were the defending 3A Division II champions. They played Brock. Brock is number 1. Or Brock is if they're not number 1, they're number 2 in the 3A Division 1 rankings. And then they lost to Graham, only 7-0 in district, who's also state ranked. So it's a really tough schedule. Obviously, it's a small district. There's only 5 teams in that district, so they play 4 games. And so they went 3-1 in that district to get 2nd place. And so it's better that you're not playing Graham, but this is going to be a tough matchup for Van Alstyne. They did get that playoff win, that monkey off their back 2 years ago, and obviously facing Graham last year didn't help. And Iowa Park is trying to make the 2nd round for the 8th straight season. So they usually come away with the win in their first game. It's going to be interesting to see. Obviously, we've talked about OU with Van Alstyne. They are better. This was a team last year that went into the playoffs with 3 wins. They have 7 this year, and this is not, because we changed districts or, the realignment helped us. They played the same opponents that they did last year, and they were obviously better against a lot of them. And they were better in the games that they lost. The margins were better. So it's just going to be a question of can they bounce back from a game that I'm sure they were hyped up for, the chance to finish 2nd place, and it did not go well for them. So it'll be interesting to see how Van Alstyne bounces back. And again, that's at 7 p.m. on Friday at Saginaw Chisholm Trail in that bi-district contest. Moving down to the 3A level, we'll start over in Region 1 because there is a Class 3A Division 1 Region 1 bi-district game as Whitesboro takes on Breckenridge. This game is 7:30 on Friday at Fort Worth Castleberry. Whitesboro comes in at 6-4. Breckenridge is 4-6. Both teams are coming off lopsided wins. Breckenridge won 61-0 against San Angelo, Texas Leadership Charter Academy, which is a mouthful for a team that got beat 61-0. And Whitesboro coming off the big 52-9 win against Peaster. We said last week that was a huge game for seeding because if you got fourth place, like Peaster ended up getting, you were going to face defending state champion Jim Ned. And the winner, of course, gets this Breckenridge team that has a losing record. And Whitesboro is rolling. They have gotten on this roll here at the end. They won the games they needed to, not only to clinch a playoff spot, not only to clinch the third seed, but they've done it in a pretty good fashion, and it's hardly better than a game that you win 52-9, you're up 39-0 at halftime, and you do it in a dominating fashion to where Mac Harper goes 9 of 10 passing for 346 yards and 6 touchdowns. Yes, that is correct. He had 9 completions for 346 yards and 6 touchdowns. Almost all of the touchdowns were long passes. The longest being the longest you can possibly have, a 99-yarder to Jay Sanders. Sanders finished with 4 catches for 183 yards and 3 touchdowns. Sean Shares had 2 catches for 111 yards and a touchdown. Jake Hermes had 3 catches for 75 yards and 2 touchdowns. And that was just from Harper. Then Clay Hermes came on, went 3 of 4, passing for 49 yards, and also had a touchdown pass to Torrin Nagelstad. Asher Contreras had a rushing touchdown. He led the way on the ground, 7 carries for 86 yards in that score. The touchdown passes were 23 yards to Sanders, 99 to Sanders, 65 yards to Hermes, 61 yards to Sanders, 75 yards to Shares, and then Hermes had a 3-yard pass. And those are just ones from Harper. So huge passing plays to get this win, and the defense dominated, especially in the early going. Petrie just, they tried to stay in it. They went for some fourth downs. They got stopped. They actually got 2 points on a safety, so the touchdown from the offense didn't happen until the fourth quarter. So again, Whitesboro clicking at the right time, and they're facing a Breckenridge team that, yes, it does look impressive. The one that they're coming off of, they're better than they have been the last couple of years. They have 4 wins this year. They only won 2 games combined the past 2 years. But there is a common opponent, and I know people. There are some coaches that don't like doing common opponent matchups and comparisons because, styles make fights and different teams may do different things against different opponents. But this is one of the rare times early on, especially, that there is a common opponent that we can look at, and that happens to be the Bells Panthers. Whitesboro opened the season by beating Bells in overtime, 40-34. And then Breckenridge a couple weeks later hosted Bells because Howe had to cancel that game against the Panthers for non-district for COVID reasons, and then so they were scrambling to find a game, and they were able to get Breckenridge lined up, and they went to Breckenridge and they beat them 41-20. So if Whitesboro is a touchdown or if you want to say they're even with Bells because they took overtime to beat them. If you want to say they're even in regulation against Bells, and Bells is 3 touchdowns better than Breckenridge, that can maybe give you a baseline for when we see this score on Friday night to maybe have a guess as to what will happen. So no matter what, it was big for Whitesboro. One, like I said, they played well down the stretch to get in / get a really good to get a better seed, and that's coming off of getting back to the playoffs after missing last year when they lost on a tiebreaker. So just getting here and being able to say, hey, we're back in the playoffs. We're going to start another playoff streak. Now the question is, can they go and win this game against Breckenridge at 7:30 on Friday at Fort Worth Castleberry? So that's going to be one to watch. And again, if they do end up making a run or two, depending on who advances, there might be some long trips in store for the Bearcat fans. Fort Worth's not bad to start off with, but there could be some stuff deep out there. Same thing for Van Alstyne. If they somehow get past Iowa Park, the being in Region 1 leads to some of those long trips. So enjoy what could be your shortest trip of the season, unless you can get some all-local playoff matchups down the road where it's a little bit closer to home. So, but we'll see what Whitesboro can do. I think they're probably favored. I would imagine that they're favored, but we'll see what happens with the Bearcats on Friday night. Shifting regions, we go from Region 1 to Region 2 for a Class 3A Division 1 Region 2 bi-district game that has Pottsboro taking on Tatum. This game is at 7 o'clock on Friday in Emory-Raines. Pottsboro comes in at 5-4. They lost against Winsboro 49-20 to end district play. And Tatum is also coming off a loss. They lost a close one in the final minutes, 28-27 against Sabine. So to touch on Pottsboro's game last week, we said it's going to be interesting to see what was going to happen because Winsboro had to win to have a chance to make the playoffs. If they lost, they were out. It's their last home game. It's their senior night. They had a lot going on, but they knew they had to win. And Pottsboro was locked into the second seed no matter what happened. They weren't guaranteed a share of the district. They had to get help on that. If they lost and they ended up tied with Mineola, they were still getting the second seed because they beat Mineola. So it was going to be kind of interesting to see how this played out. And it was close after a quarter, 14-7. Even halftime, it's 28-13. But Winsboro was able to pull away, and they did it with a ground attack that gained almost 450 yards. Pottsboro struggled on the ground. They did get all their touchdowns came on the ground, but they were short touchdown runs. Jet Carroll had one. Major McBride had two. The longest of those was a McBride one for 12 yards. But for the most part, Winsboro controlled the tempo in this one. Reed Thompson did have 5 catches for 131 yards for the Cardinals. Jake Kubik had 5 for 52. But once they were behind, they just weren't able to kind of get it in gear. And then, of course, for Winsboro, they didn't end up making the playoffs. They ended up staying tied with Bonham, and Bonham had beat them on a head-to-head in their matchup. I believe that came down to stopping a 2-point conversion that Bonham did to get that win. It was like 51-49 or 50-49 or something like that, and it came down to a 2-point conversion at the end that was the difference. Pottsboro was in the playoffs for the 12th straight year, and unfortunately for them, this is one of those where they may have gotten the short end of a first-round matchup because Tatum was actually ranked in the top 10 in the state rankings before losing this last week. They have 2 losses. Both of their losses are by 1 point. And I think it was not being totally familiar with that district, but it did seem that that was an upset in losing to Sabine last week. And they did drop out of the rankings this week because of that loss. So they're a very good team. Obviously, 8-2 could easily be 10-0. Of course, if they were 10-0, you wouldn't be playing them because they would have gotten a better seed. But it did not help the outcome in that last district game to have them drop to the 3rd seed, essentially because they lost the head-to-head against Sabine. So that's a tough draw. But you got to play good people, and in this region, there's some really good people. Obviously, Mount Vernon won the district. They're the number 3 team in the rankings. Grandview, who obviously Pottsboro people are familiar with because of the state championship runner-up appearance to the Zebras. They're number 9 in the rankings. Malakoff, who eliminated Pottsboro last year, is 10 in the rankings. So it's a loaded region. You're going to have to face somebody like a Tatum anyway, who's probably, if they're not 11th, they're definitely top 15. And Pottsboro was on a roll. Obviously, they're semi limping into the playoffs, obviously because of who they played Obviously playing Mount Vernon, and losing that game to be locked into the second seed. You would have liked to have had a better showing to get into the playoffs, but we'll see what happens with Pottsboro. It's gonna be. I think this is. I think a lot of people are interested to see what this score turns out to be, because maybe Tatum is not as good as we thought, and obviously Pottsboro has played some really good people. They have the 4 losses. One of those is to Gunner, who obviously is number 2 in the Division II rankings. The loss to Mount Vernon, who is, I believe, number 3 in the Division I rankings. So you can kind of look at a couple of those losses and see, well, they played some really good people. And they have shown they can be really good, especially on offense, with some of the stuff that they were able to do at the start of district play. So I think some people are sort of interested to see how this matchup comes out for sure when Pottsboro faces Tatum at 7 p.m. on Friday at Emory Reigns to open up the playoffs in Division I, Region 2. And then the other team in Division I and 3A, the Howe Bulldogs, they unfortunately had to go out to Mount Vernon and play, like we said, the number 3 team in the state, and they came away with a 56-6 loss, and that gave them an 0-10 record and an 0-7 district record. So that means that is the second consecutive 0-10 season for Howe. They have lost 22 straight games going back to the 2019 season. If there were a couple of bright spots, and again, you look at the matchup, obviously, injuries were a little bit of an issue in this one. Some changes at some key spots. It's kind of in the lineup, out of the lineup sort of a thing. Antoine Rattler had 19 carries for 81 yards and a touchdown. Cooper Jones had 3 catches, 45 yards. Braden Ulmer had 7 catches for 49 yards. Caleb McNutt was at quarterback in place of Austin Haley, threw for 124 yards. So, obviously, like I said, disappointing finish. I don't think anybody thought that they were going to beat Mount Vernon, but we've talked along the way. They've had a couple of games that they thought they had chances to win. They played a really good schedule too. We talked about, they were going to play Bells. They did play Callisburg, who ended up going 9-1. And they had some chances against some people to get a win to break this streak. The good news, it looks like from a realignment standpoint, they turned in 349, and that may send them, or it should send them, down to Division II. They were one of the smallest Division I teams, like literally by a handful of kids. The number was 350 last time. The number always usually goes up. But so there might be a little bit of a sweat. The interesting thing, of course, with that is that if Howe stays up, that means Gunner's going up, because Gunner turned in 354. So obviously if the number somehow went backwards and was like 340 or 345 to keep Howe up, that means Gunner would go up to D1 this time, and that might change Howe's situation district-wise, because that would make it a little more compact around here. You would have Pottsboro and Bonham, Howe and Gunner potentially all in a district, but the expectation is they're going to go down, and that would make things a little more palatable for them in terms of their opponents in district, in non-district, for what they would be able to potentially schedule. The odds are they're probably going to end up in the next district that we're going to talk about, or some permutation of it, the 8-3A Division II, that has Gunner and Bells and Leonard and Whitewright. The question with Whitewright will be if do they stay 3A, depending on what that cutoff's going to be. They could go down to 2A, but they may essentially just kick Lone Oak out and add Howe into that district, and that would obviously be a lot better for them to play the Blue Ridges and some of the a more local district. Obviously, one alone, that's just better. You don't have to deal with all that travel, but it would put them on a much more level playing field than what they've been dealing with the last couple of years and allow them to maybe get a little bit of success going forward. So we'll see what happens when the realignment, when the cutoff comes out, because then we'll know for sure if they're here in the next couple of weeks, if they're going to go down to Division II, and then they can start, fantasizing about what that district's going to look like. We'll know for sure if Gunner's going to be staying in that district or potentially leaving it. So there's a lot of hope that's going to happen. At least that Howe's going to move down. So I know they're going to be excited if that happens. And we'll find that out here in the next couple of weeks. But to the teams that did make the play, I guess we should, since we're sliding down, so we're going to District 8-3A, Division 2, and since we're going to talk about Gunner and their game last week, since it involves SNS, we'll include SNS in this discussion. So Gunner opens the playoffs against Scurry Rosser in a 3A Division 2 Region 2 bi-district game. This is at 7 o'clock on Thursday at Mesquite Memorial Stadium. So make sure you go to the right stadium in Mesquite. That's Mesquite Memorial. Gunner is 10-0. Scurry Rosser is 5-5. Gunner won last week 49-7 against SNS. Scurry Rosser won 60-6 against Corsicana Mildred. We'll talk about their deal in a little bit. But since we're talking about the game last week for Gunner, so Gunner did win 49-7. It was 42-0 at halftime. SNS got on the board in the fourth quarter when Colton Corville caught a 8-yard pass from Coda Richardson. And to touch on some of the highlights there, so Corville finished with 6 catches for 69 yards to lead the Rams. Richardson only ended up throwing for 84 yards, was picked off 4 times. He did lead them in rushing, 25 carries for 60 yards. And SNS ended up missing out on the playoffs. They were the team that made it last year that dropped out. White Wright was the team that got in this year, and SNS did not. They finished 2-8 and overall and 2-4 in district play. If they would have essentially won the game against White Wright where they lost 14-0, that would have given them the tiebreaker, or that would have actually given them the outright win. That would have flip-flopped White Wright and SNS in the standings. Obviously, it's a step back for SNS. They graduated some key guys last year. They were hoping to prove that the jump that they made during last year from 19 to 20 was not a fluke. But they really struggled to get things going offensively. And then they got off to the good start in district play. They were 2-0. They beat Blue Ridge and Lone Oak, who they had to beat if you were going to be in this conversation. But unfortunately, the White Wright game ended up being the key game, and it was kind of last year. The difference last year was SNS had 2 close games against White Wright and Leonard last year, single-digit victories. Literally one play, kick a field goal. The other team kicks a field goal, you lose. And that was the difference. And last year SNS was able to actually get the 3rd seed. So I know that's disappointing for them. And I don't want to say it's sort of a rebuilding year. But they are going to lose some key guys that were seniors on both sides of the ball. And I think they're going to have to reevaluate some things. But they do have some nice pieces in the junior-sophomore class. It's just going to be a question of, one, what does the district look like? Because obviously there's a chance with their location, they could go back west. Like we said, Gunner and SNS came over in this last realignment into this district. So that's going to be interesting to see what happens with them. And of course, if they stay in this district and White Wright goes down to 2A and Gunner goes up to Division 1, well then 2 of the 4 playoff teams are out of the district. So that would, depending on who you brought in, if you're bringing in a Howe, obviously they don't have it's not like last time where you brought in Bells from a district and that was really good, won a district title, and Gunner, who's been doing Gunner things for the last 6 years, and you put them in this district and you basically said, hey, 2 of the spots are taken, the rest of you guys are fighting for 3rd and 4th place, which is what it has been the last 2 years. Gunner's been first both years and Bells has been second both years. So that's going to be interesting to see what happens if SNS goes back west. Who will they be hooked up with, or if this district sort of stays the same? Who gets kicked out? Who gets kicked in? Based on the numbers. So like we said, the disappointing step back for SNS, but of course the good thing is, they made that run that seemingly came out of nowhere last year. There's nothing to say that they can't turn around just as quickly, depending on how things shake out for them next year as well. So that's where SNS is at. And then, of course, Gunner, again, they do Gunner things. They ended the regular season by averaging a little over 50 points. They gave up 8.9 points a game. A lot of that was against their backups. They only allowed one touchdown on the defense, allowed only one touchdown in the first half all season. They actually gave up 2 touchdowns in the first. We've talked about this. The only other touchdown that a team has scored against them in the first half was a pick 6. So the defense had nothing to do with it. So they only gave up 2 touchdowns the whole regular season in the first half. And they did a lot of their scoring in the first half because a lot of the games were like this one where, they win 56-3 and 49 of the 56 scores in the first half. In this game, 42 of the 49 are scored in the first half, and they're able to just kind of cruise from there. And this game was definitely a team effort. A lot of guys spread out the production. Hudson Graham did go 8 for 11 passing for 114 yards with 3 touchdowns. Cole Lemons had 3 catches for 103 yards and 2 touchdowns. Ethan Sloan had a chipping in a little bit of everywhere. He had 4 catches for 47 yards and a touchdown catch. He had only 4 carries for 14 yards, but he did have a 72-yard touchdown pass on his lone throw. Ivy Hellman, his lone catch was for a touchdown. And then, Gunner runs for almost 200 yards, but the leading rusher was Saul Rodriguez, 4 carries for 47 yards and a touchdown. Braden Hinton scored on the ground. Ashton Bennett scored on the ground. This was sort of a by committee sort of game. Hudson Graham only had 1 carry. We mentioned Sloan only had 4. Obviously, they have bigger fish to fry with the playoffs ahead. And so they really spread out the carries to get through this game and make sure everybody's healthy. They have had guys throughout the year get dinged up. It obviously hasn't mattered because they had another undefeated season, another undefeated district run. They've won 40 straight district games. It's their 6th straight district title, and of course they are going for a 6th straight region title, and that starts against Scurry Rosser. You may see that number that they put up against Mildred, 60-6. They've actually won their last 3 games. They have scored 158 points combined in those games and only given up 6, and that should not worry you because that basically is the bottom 3 teams in this district that they had to beat to make the playoffs. And as we saw last year with this district, I don't know if it's going to happen the same as it did last year. But this district, the Gunner, Bells, SNS, and Leonard all won their first round matchups. And Gunner particularly destroyed the 4th seed, who last year was Rice. Rice did not make the playoffs this year. So I don't think this is much of a test. I don't know if next round will be much of a test. Once we get to that 3rd round, though, there will be some potentially familiar faces. Eastland is out there again. Holiday, who is undefeated, and obviously Gunner people are very familiar with Holiday because they have played them in region finals during this run. Last year it was Eastland was the team that was able to get that. Bells could potentially be in the mix. I certainly don't want to count them out, and we'll talk about them here in a second because of what they're looking at. But I do think I mean, I think everybody does know if you're talking about Gunner, this is their region to lose. No one has come particularly close at any point during this, the 5 years leading up to this. But I do think, I don't. They would have to. They're on this side of the bracket. I mean, I'm sort of interested if Callisburg can somehow get there. I mean, that would be fun. One, because it's local, and there's a lot of interesting stories there. But they've obviously improved there. But the other side of the bracket, I feel is probably a little more. There's a little better quality on the other side of the bracket, just because Holiday is there, and I think Bells is there. Eastland is there. Their record is not as good. Obviously, they lost some really key players off of last year's team, but they could be in a spoiler situation. But I would also say don't be surprised if it's Holiday Gunner for the fourth time in 6 years or whatever it is. So gonna be interesting to see. Like I said, I think the first two rounds for Gunner, they should not have a very hard time. But of course, last year they got to the region final and destroyed Eastland. A lot of people thought Eastland was going to give them a game, and that game was over at halftime. So it's just what Gunner does. It's going to take some injuries or something crazy to knock them off what has been a really good season, and I think everybody expects them to win the region again, and face maybe Canadian in the semifinals. Childress won that district, so I think if it's not Canadian, Childress is now probably the team to beat out in Region 1. So if Gunner does get that far, way down the road in December, it'll be a little bit. Maybe we'll get some fresh blood on that side of the bracket. But Gunner's trying to win their sixth straight title, so there's that as well. Moving to the other in the district, the other playoff matchups. So Bells finished second. They will take on Blooming Grove in a 3A Division II Region 2 game. 7:30 on Friday at Wills Point. Bells is 7-3. Blooming Grove is 6-3. And again, you look at records, and this could be a potentially good matchup. But again, last year, this opposing district was not very strong, and so I don't know how much resistance there might be. Obviously, the big question with Bells is they did not play last week. They had the district bye, so they have the rust versus rest factor is in effect. Bells has been banged up. They have had some guys that I think for them having the bye at the end might actually be a good thing, just because of getting everybody healthy at the right time. Blooming Grove is coming off a win, 66-12 against Rice. And so we'll see how things look. There is the potential, like I mentioned, if Bells does win like they did last year, they could play Eastland in the second round again. This is the 8th straight year that Bells has made the playoffs. If they do get to the second round, this will be the 3rd straight year that they've been in the second round, and that'll be the first for the program to make it to the second round 3 straight years. So gonna be interesting to see what happens when Bells takes on Blooming Grove at 7:30 on Friday at Wills Point. And the last matchup here in District 8 3A for the playoffs, Whitewright will be taking on Palmer. That is a Class 3A Division 2 Region 2 bi-district matchup. This game is at 7:30 on Thursday at Community. Whitewright comes in at 4-6. Palmer is 7-3. Whitewright is coming off a 44-13 loss against Leonard. We talked about last week, that was a seeding game as well. Winner gets 3rd place, loser gets 4th place. So Leonard is the 3rd seed. Whitewright got the 4th seed. And so Whitewright is trying to do what Leonard did last year. The 4th seed knocked off Palmer. Like we said, this district got swept. This 7-3A Division 2. Palmer's been the district champ here 3 years in a row. Last year did not go well. Obviously, Leonard came away with a win, so Whitewright's trying to pull that off, which if they can, would be their first playoff win since 2016. Of course, White Wright missed the playoffs last year because they had to forfeit the game against Leonard. They had made the playoffs the year before that, had a close first-round game against a district champ that came up just short. I covered that game, and it was like 52-47. I think it was against Big Sandy Harmony, and they almost pulled that off. So they're going to try to look to finish the job as a 4 seed, beating a 1 seed, despite the 4-6 record. If they do win, I think it's probably going to have to be a low-scoring game just off of what White Wright's done this year. They have had moments where they have put up some big points, but they have done it's been a relatively a low-scoring group, and this last week was no exception. Caden Caraway did throw for 178 yards, and they made some big plays. Maverick Sartain had 2 catches for 96 yards. Colby Jones and a touchdown. Colby Jones had 2 catches for 36 yards and a touchdown. He also led the team in rushing, 17 carries for 74 yards. But other than that, it was really tough sledding against Leonard, who, like we said, they wanted a better seed. They were the 4 seed last year. They wanted to move up there. So it'll be interesting to see. I don't know a whole lot about Palmer. I do know that, like I said, that did not go well for them last year as the district champ, and I don't be surprised. I know people are probably gonna say, oh, how did 4 beat a 1? How does a 4-6 team beat a 7-3 team? Don't be surprised if we see on Thursday night that I think obviously everybody expects Gunner to win out of this district, but don't be surprised if White Wright does as well. That was the score started trickling in last year from these matchups, and it was like, oh, 8-3A1 again, 8-3A1 again. Oh my, they were able to pull off a couple upsets. So there's obviously a chance that could happen as well this year with White Wright taking on Palmer 7:30 Thursday at Community in that bi-district matchup as well. We'll head down to the bottom. Last couple ones to wrap up. We'll talk about the 2 teams in the 5-2A District 1 that didn't make the playoffs because they played each other. So we were able to knock that out in one fell swoop. Which is always good. You always want to do it in one fell swoop. You don't want multiple swoops. I guess unless you're a White Wright, and then you have great athletes. That's a joke, people. And so we have this District 5-2A Division 1 matchup. Collinsville beat Tom Bean 62-0. So Collinsville finishes their season at 4-6 and 2-3 in district. And they end up tied for 4th. But of course, like we said last week, they since they lost to Trenton, they lost the tiebreaker for the 4th seed, so they miss out on the playoffs after making it last year. And then Tom Bean finishes at 0-9 and 0-5 in district play. We'll touch on Tom Bean first. Again, we've talked about it almost every week. They had a really good start. The first game they lose by 3, score 3 touchdowns. You put up 22 points, and since then, they've been shut out a lot. It's been a struggle. They finish averaging 4 points, a little over 4 points a game. Less than a touchdown a game. They're giving up almost 50 points a game, and so a lot of things to work on with Tom Bean. They didn't play. This game was the first game they were able to play on their home field. Because of the delayed renovations. We've talked about that all season. They had to play at Trenton. They had to play at Bells. They were really hopeful to get this game in, and they did. But then you look and and they had some guys out, injuries, that sort of thing. And then you look at the final stats, and they finished with 3 yards. They had 24 yards passing, and they had negative 21 yards rushing. So, if there's a team that was probably ready for the offseason, if it wasn't Hal, it was going to be Tom Bean to just really sort of regroup. New coach this year, obviously not what Coach Whitmire wanted, being moved up from a coordinator position. Gonna be interesting to see what happens in realignment for them. Collinsville, who we'll get to here in a second, is going to be moving down. There's some talk that Lindsay might move down. Just based on where the number is. So this district could get smashed to heck in a couple different ways. So it's going to be interesting to see what that might do to have a chance to make the playoffs. Before Lindsay and Albert came over here, this was a 5-team district. Celeste was in it, and all you had to do was win one game to have a chance to make the playoffs. So maybe that might be the way for Tom Bean to be in the mix. You just have to win that one game and find a way to get in. And then Collinsville, obviously disappointing for them. They opened district play. They beat Lindsay, who ended up tying for first place. That's Lindsay's only loss, the defending district champs, and they still ended up getting the 1 seed. They dropped that opener. Collinsville had that crazy comeback. They were able to pull that off, and then they lose to the three other playoff teams, Alvord, Tioga, and Trenton, and then beat Tom Bean. So, in hindsight, they had to beat Trenton to get the tiebreaker there, or they had to beat Alvord or Tioga to finish ahead of Trenton since they would have lost to them. So I know that's disappointing. It's a really young Collinsville team. They only had 1 senior on the roster, so basically everybody's going to be back. And you look at this game, a lot of people doing the scoring. Nathan Bocanegra had 5 catches for 136 yards, 2 touchdowns. Carter Scott had 3 touchdowns. Parker Wells had a touchdown. Trevor O'Neill had a touchdown run. They settled on Logan Jenkins settled in at quarterback. He had some huge games this year. Colin Barnes, whether one game would be rushing, another game would be receiving. They do have some weapons. And obviously this game got out of hand as Tom Bean. Most people have beaten Tom Bean sort of in this fashion. But Collinsville has the ability, I think, to be in the mix. The question, like I said, is going to be with them. They turned in a number that was below the cutoff for Division I, Division II this last time. Are they going to be in a district with Lindsay again? If Lindsay does drop, are they going to be in Munster's district back with those guys? And if they are, that could make it tough to make the playoffs because Munster's always making the playoffs. Lindsay obviously made the playoffs, got the first seed, but you're Collinsville and you beat them, so who knows? So that'll be interesting to see what happens with realignment for sure with Collinsville if they're able to drop into a favorable district. But we won't know that here for another couple of weeks. And the other team in 5-2A Division I, the Tioga Bulldogs, they are in the playoffs. But unfortunately, they're coming into the playoffs off a loss. They lost 48-15 as they head into their 2A Division I Region 2 by-district matchup against Celeste. That is 7:30 on Thursday at Princeton. Tioga is 5-5. They are the 3rd seed in district after that loss. They had a chance to tie for first place. Would have given them a share of the district championship. Would have given them the 2nd seed because they did lose to Lindsay. So that would have given them a better seed, but not the top seed. And so they're going to take on Celeste after that loss. And that was the game we talked about, was a big seeding game. Both teams had something to play for. Albert jumped out big early, was up 35-0 at halftime, and they were able to cruise from there. Tioga did put up some stats. I know that's not the name of the game. They weren't able to get on the board until after being down 35-0. Johnny Dorpinghouse had 18 carries for 110 yards and a touchdown. Logan Westbrook had 21 carries for 74 yards and a touchdown. He also threw for 195 yards, but he was 14 of 38 to get there, and he had 3 interceptions. Dorpinghouse had 3 catches for 60 yards. Tyler Henley, 5 catches, 52 yards. Austin Norwood, 5 catches for 37 yards. So not the end to the regular season that Tioga would have wanted, but they are in the playoffs, which they were not last year. They are the 3rd seed, so it's not a bad place to be. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Celeste for a couple of reasons. One, again, we have a team here with Celeste that did not play last week. They had the district bye in their district, so they haven't played for a couple of weeks. They were on a 5-game winning streak to get to the end to their end of district play. So the question, of course, is rest versus rust. Is it going to take them a little while to get going? Or did they need it to get healthy at some spots? The other interesting thing is that these two scrimmaged each other before the season. So it's hard to gauge scrimmages and who's doing what and what you're showing and all that sort of stuff. But it sounds like it was a pretty even scrimmage. So at the very least, you have two teams that know, well, we can compete with this other team. So I mean, obviously Celeste is 7-2. They have a good record. They probably are not thinking anything of it. But if I'm Tioga, I'm 5-5, coming off a loss. Man, we had a chance to win a share of the district championship. We messed that up. But you're in the playoffs, and you're facing a team that you have been on the field with. You have, stood toe-to-toe with. You know how big they are. You know how fast they are, and you were able to hang with them at least in a scrimmage setting. In a live quarter, that sort, live half, that sort of thing. So I think that could help out. But again, no matter what happens, this is a program. We've talked about it all year. First year under Chad Rogers coming over from Denison. Last year they won one game. This year they're 5-5. They've won as many games this year as the 3 previous years. So this is year 4 of being in 11-man. They had won 5 games the first 3 years, and now they've won 5 this year, and they're in the playoffs. So that's improvement. That's all you can ask for. So that's a good start. And if you can get a playoff victory under your belt, that's even better, because they're not as young as Collinsville in terms of the number of seniors, but a lot of these guys are going to be back next year, and it's a good starting point in the new direction under a new coach to do what they've done so far this year. And the last team that we'll talk about, down in the 6-man ranks, Texoma Christian. They did not make the playoffs, and they closed out their season with a 60-13 loss against second place Irving Faustina. So they were coming off their first win of the season against Dallas Fairhill. Weren't able to sustain that momentum. Faustina's really good. They're second place in the district. Their only loss was to district champion Company Classical. They have a really good record on the season as well. That's their only loss actually is to Classical. So they're now 9-1. TCS finishes the year at 1-9 and 1-4 in district play. They actually finished one game out of a playoff spot. If they would have beaten Prestonwood Christian Academy North, they would have gotten the 4 seed and made the playoffs. So they're not that far away. They're literally one game away. And I hate to say, unfortunately, last year they would have made the playoffs, or they did make the playoffs because of the COVID situation. But if they had taken 4 teams out of this district last year, they would have made it, because Azel Christian and Prestonwood were not in this district last year. They got added over the off season. So they ended up getting the 2 spots right in front of Texoma Christian. So obviously, the big name from this loss, Hayden Turner, 15 carries for 102 yards, threw a touchdown pass, also returned a fumble for a touchdown in this game. The touchdown pass was to Chris Barnett. And so TCS ends their season. Again, if they could have made the playoffs, I think it would have been good for them. Dropping down to 6-man last year like they did. Hey, we're dropping down. We made the playoffs. Hey, we made the playoffs again. So it's going to be interesting to see. The biggest thing I think with this program is that there was some turnover from last year's team to this year's team that was not senior related. And so the question is, are you going to be able to keep some of those guys that come out early? Can you keep them around to build that continuity and sort of gel and grow together, instead of, okay, now we're, even though it's only 6-man, we think we're going to have 5 of the 6 guys back, or 4 of the 6 guys back. And then you look and it's like, oh, we got to replace 3 or 4 guys every year. So I think that's the challenge there for TCS. And they've shown some flashes. They've had some moments. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with them next year. See what happens district-wise as well, and all that good stuff. So that's where we're at heading into Week 12. Technically it's Week 12, but it's Week 1 of the playoffs. Regular season is done. We are down to 8 teams that we will be looking to see what happens to them on Thursday and Friday night. I will be at a game on Thursday, and of course I will be with Denison on Friday to see what happens with them, and we'll see who advances, and we will see who we're talking about playing in the area round next week. And like I said, we'll probably do this as long as the team's sticking around. It may only be, by that point, maybe a 5 or 10 minute podcast. But I think it's worth it we're going to see this all the way through. If there's a game, we're going to preview it. So tune in, stay safe, enjoy the football no matter where you're going, whether you have a team that's playing still or if you're just going to watch some good football. We've got some good teams around here that I think it might be worth a trip to go watch them. Hopefully they get a little closer to home as some of these rounds go on, but definitely worth it to get out there and see them. So appreciate you always as always listening to what we do here on the podcast. Enjoy the football, and we'll talk to you next week.